Kicking off at number 5. Innsmouth. And yes, of course, our first destination on this whistle-stop tour of Lovecraftian fiction has to be the one place that you surely wouldn't want to spend your summer holiday in, well, unless you were looking for that particular Innsmouth look. Of course, the small town of Innsmouth, Massachusetts. Now, before we see what all the fuss is about, it's probably best that we briefly talk about a little place called Lovecraft Country, because it's going to pop up a few times here and there. As some of you may know, within his fictional works, H.P. Lovecraft created a small area of New England that featured recurrently in his many tales of cosmic horror, oftentimes bleak East Coast Atlantic towns and villages, sleepy suburbs that harboured some deep, dark and downright dank secrets. One of those places is Innsmouth, a coastal town founded way back in 1643, famed for its otherwise fishy disposition. You see, as the primary backdrop of Lovecraft's 1931 novella The Shadow over Innsmouth, the story's narrator Robert Olmsted quickly discovered that the strange denizens of the town were in fact members of the cult of Dagon and had kept an ancient pact with the horrifying keepers of Dagon, the Deep Ones, fish-like horrifying monstrosities. As part of their pact with the Deep Ones, the residents of Innsmouth were forced to interbreed with them, creating a long line of rather fishy-looking individuals. And not only that, as is also revealed later in the novella, those of Deep One heritage eventually fully transform into their fishy ancestors and flee to a place called Devil's Reef, just off the coast of Innsmouth, where the ancient city of Yalanc resides. Yeah, it's safe to say that if your date tells you they're actually from Innsmouth, it's probably best to not order the sea bass and just walk away. Swinging in at number 4, Arkham. And again, a place that I'm sure many of you expected to appear on this list, and a name that many of you will be familiar with, even if you're not as up to date with the many places and names of Lovecraftian fiction. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Arkham Asylum. What a great game. Anyway, as we said previously, Lovecraft Country is perhaps the most densely populated and also widely unfortunate places in the Lovecraft universe. With Innsmouth, Dunwich, Kingsport and Providence, it's safe to say that all of them merely linger in the shadow of the misty town known as Arkham, Massachusetts. As Lovecraft described in The Thing on the Doorstep, the ancient, mouldering and subtly fearsome town in which we live, witch-cursed, legend-haunted Arkham, whose huddled, sagging gambrel roofs and crumbling Georgian balustrades brood out the centuries beside the darkly muttering Miskatonic. I mean, Lovecraft often gets a bit of stick for his lack of technical prose, but what an awesome sentence that is. The fact is, Lovecraft, as well as August Derleth and many other Cthulhu mythos writers, had such a high reverence for Arkham. It was a place crafted with a love for cosmic horror, and also a place that featured more often than any others in their works. Herbert West's Re-Animator, The Colour Out of Space, The Whisperer in Darkness, The Dreams in the Witch House, The Shadow Out of Time, and many others, all either feature Arkham or make a note of its shadowy reputation. And of course, as you'll all be waiting with bated breath for me to mention, it is home to the notorious Miskatonic University, the home of the largest collection of arcane literature and tomes of the occult known to mankind. It says something that the many professors that form Lovecraft's protagonists were primarily the faculty of Miskatonic University. Getting a job there, or even living in Arkham for that matter, was quite the occupational hazard. Next up at number 3, The Endless.
How is that possible? It's crazy, right?
Oh man. If you've managed to already notice, this film also made my top spot on the list for the top 5 horror movies that you missed part 2. And it's also making this list because it's so damn good. I know a lot of you also felt the same way, but The Endless just manages to capture that weird sense of uncertainty that regularly encompasses the best of sci-fi horror. Written and directed by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, who also, as chance would have it, are the lead actors of this film, the film focuses on the story of 2 brothers who decide it's a great idea to revisit the cult that they once belonged to. Spoilers, that's never a good idea. Honestly, like before, I really don't want to give too much away about this film, because going into it with zero expectations like I did is the best way to experience The Endless. Also, it's testament to the film's creators that this entire film was made on a shoestring budget, and it's living proof that if you have a good idea and a smart script, you can make something as complex as Lovecraftian fiction seem effortless. Or endless. Sorry. Swinging in at number 2, In the Mouth of Madness. And yes, rest easy, John Carpenter is here, with what some of you consider to be the height of cinematic Lovecraftian horror. And as a huge John Carpenter fan myself, I'll say that you're not far off, because In the Mouth of Madness is an on-screen onslaught of why science fiction and horror go together like peanut butter and jelly, or John Carpenter and a camera. It's also one of the only films where I believe that Lovecraft's true intentions, as well as the horror greats before and after him, were fully realised for a mainstream audience. And the existential levels to this film kind of blow my mind all over again every time I think back to them. Since the dawn of human literature, writers have mused on the notion of being a character in their own novel, and the blurred signposts that point between our reality and something not quite our own. Carpenter addresses all of this and then some, all while managing to pay tribute to Lovecraft himself through the works of the mysterious Sutter Kane. Also, it stars Sam Neill at his 90s peak, and even has a supporting role from Charlton freaking Heston. Released in 1995, In the Mouth of Madness, written by Michael DeLuca and directed by John Carpenter, for all intents and purposes was a financial disappointment, middled out at the box office and was received poorly by critics. But just like Lovecraft, that doesn't stop it being a colossal of horror cinema, and the final part in a trilogy of Carpenter's finest work. And finally, our number one spot, The Void.
Bev. No, don't do that. Bev! Put the scissors down. Look at me! Bev, okay, stop.
Here's exactly why this film is awesome, and here's why it hits the number one spot on this list and proves that sci-fi horror is alive and writhing in the world of cinema. The Void, written and directed by Stephen Kostanski and Jeremy Gillespie, was inspired when Gillespie was working at Pinewood Studios and overheard that the main man himself, Guillermo del Toro, was working on At the Mountains of Madness on the floor above him. Of course, unfortunately, we haven't heard a sniff about del Toro's Lovecraftian adaptation, but from the exact same creative spark came 2016's The Void, and we as horror fans are all better off for it. I love this film because it makes no grand claims of being something that it's not. It's humble in its approach to the same greats of horror that it builds its vision around, all while offering a few fresh twists and turns in an otherwise beaten out narrative. Essentially, The Void is a crowd-funded film, yet the practical effects in this film are astounding, and instead of relying on quick cuts and badly cobbled together CGI, we see exactly why the likes of Carpenter's The Thing and Clive Barker's Cenobites had so much weight in horror cinema. Also, it had some of the most beautiful promotional graphic design I've seen in a long time. Hey, I'm a sucker for a good poster. Give The Void a watch because it's fun as hell and worth every second of your time.
Kicking us off at number 5, we've got Ygolac. This great old one is also known as the god of perversion and depravity. You would think that in a world where adult material is available to anyone and everyone with an internet connection, these wouldn't mean too much, but Ygolac takes it many steps further. We're not just talking about human perversion and depravity, although that is pretty wild. We're talking about perversion and depravity belonging to anything. If a sapient being could conceivably think it up, sane or insane, Ygolac has it in spades. And he is not afraid to flaunt this. This disgusting beast is sadistic. It will do anything to cause pain, suffering, and a lingering feeling of obscenity. Thankfully, he's sealed behind a brick wall in an unknown ruin. However, it's not too hard to bust him out. If someone reads his name in the Revelations of Glaaki, he'll be summoned forth. He's not coming to do anyone's bidding either. No, he is all about taking over human hosts and enlisting people to be his servants or his food. There's not much room to negotiate here. Ygolac is always looking for humans who read perverse and forbidden literature to serve him. So, if you're watching this video, you probably already tick one, if not both, of those boxes. Good luck. If you see a morbidly obese man with no head or neck and mouths in the palms of his hands, you know you've been selected. Not much to do but submit. His true form is unknown, but that's likely because nobody would be able to comprehend it even if they were to behold it. And if none of that was enough to convince you that Ygolac is bad news, you should also know that he kills a bookstore owner and wears his skin to lure in more people. Who does that? Coming in at number 4, we've got Yig. Another great old one. Yig is the father of serpents, also known as the snake god. This half-anthropomorphic beast has been worshipped as a god in all sorts of places. First appearing in Lovecraft and Bishop's The Curse of Yig, this ghastly abomination is a gigantic snake with the arms of a man. Sometimes it'll appear as a reptilian humanoid as well. Fiercely devoted to his children, or all snakes as we might say, Yig will emerge from his slumber every fall to take revenge on those who would do them harm. He punishes snake haters by turning them into horrible human-snake amalgamations, or simply by sending snakes to kill them in their sleep. I know which one I prefer. the quick death. Yig once ruled over the Crimson Cavern of Yoth beneath the subterranean land of Kenyan, but eventually the serpent men he presided over transferred their loyalties to Tsathoggua. So there's some beef between Yig and this other old one, and beef between him and his once serpent men who are now cursed. My favorite or most repellent Yig story involves a young family moving out to Oklahoma in search of a better life. The wife noticed a nest of rattlesnakes near her new house, and knowing that her husband was terrified of the squiggly creatures, killed the lot of them. She unfortunately did not know Yig was watching. That autumn he awoke from his long rest and went after the family. First, Yig sent snakes to kill their dog. Low blow. Then they tricked the wife into thinking her husband was the snake god himself. This caused her to kill her own love with an axe. After all the pain and suffering were through, Yig then bequeathed one last punishment against this serpent-smashing sinner. He turned her into a half-human, half-reptile, cursed to wriggle around on her belly for all eternity. So next time you see a rattlesnake, maybe just let it bite you. I'd say death by venom doesn't seem so bad compared to all this.
Next up at number 3, Event Horizon, 1997.
Let me show you.
If you haven't seen Event Horizon, stop what you're doing right now and go and watch it. Yeah, granted, I understand this film isn't a direct interpretation of Lovecraft's work like the rest of this list are, but Lovecraft himself birthed the idea of cosmic horror, and Event Horizon is cosmically horrifying. Yeah, it's trashy in parts, yeah, some of the plot doesn't make any sense, but it's a feast for the eyes and the mind, and it's up there holding its own with some of the greats in science fiction horror. It was an absolute flop at the box office, and it was torn to shreds by critics, but like with the best cult films, Event Horizon managed to cling on to the fringes of fandom and find its rightful place as a visual memorial to Lovecraft's work. It's got a stellar cast: Lawrence Fishburne, Sam Neill, Jason Isaacs, and right from the off it proves to be genuinely terrifying, capturing that bleak isolation that Lovecraft is so renowned for. Trust me, give it a watch. Swinging in at number 2, Black Mountain Side, 2014.
Be remembered. The greatest archaeological find possibly ever.
Yeah, I like the sound of that.
There it is, gentlemen.
And this film is really up there as one of the best in recent Canadian horror cinema, right alongside the likes of Pontypool and Hobo with a Shotgun. Black Mountain Side is really good, maybe because it draws so heavily on John Carpenter's The Thing, yet manages to do so by weaving an entirely original spin on Lovecraft's work. This film is loosely based on At the Mountains of Madness, written in 1931. That also happens to be my favourite Lovecraft story of all time. Hey, I've got a thing for the Arctic, what can I say? It centres on a team of archaeologists that discover an ancient structure buried deep beneath the ice. And just as it happens in Lovecraft's tale, as you can guess, things start to quickly go badly. This film is equal parts gorgeous and equal parts terrifying, and it also managed to pick up both Best Feature and Best Screenplay at the HP Lovecraft Film Festival. If you're looking to bury yourself deep into the visual realm of Lovecraft's work and existentially contemplate the futile nature of the universe, then this film is for you. And finally, our number 1 spot, Re-Animator, 1985. And, of course, it just has to be perhaps the most notorious interpretation of Lovecraft's work to date from the esteemed director Stuart Gordon, who also made From Beyond, which made the 4th spot on this list. It's based on Lovecraft's 1922 short story Herbert West Re-Animator, but originally was picked up by Gordon because he had the desire to make a Frankenstein film, which essentially is exactly what it is. If I've got one fact to sell this movie to you, it's that special effects expert John Newlin said that before this film he'd never used more than 2 gallons of blood per picture. For Re-Animator, he used 24 gallons. HP Lovecraft aside, this film really is a hallmark in horror cinema, and it's a must-see as far as I'm concerned. For fans of Lovecraft though, it's got all the expected hotspots centering on Arkham's Miskatonic University. It tells the story of Herbert West, a medical student who discovers the power to reanimate the dead. But like we quickly learn as Lovecraftian horror fans, things quickly go awry. Re-Animator is all the best parts of splatter horror, an incredible display of visual effects, and also, strangely enough, absolutely hilarious in parts. Give it a watch, you won't be disappointed. Kicking off at number 5, Rhan-Tegoth. And it's in the form and implication of this particular Great Old One where the Lovecraftian terror truly lies, because as will be the case with many entries on this list, many of the shambling horrors that lurk within the deep have a particularly apocalyptic purpose, and Rhan-Tegoth's cosmic significance pretty much spells the end of civilization as we know it. Well, that's if it wakes up, anyway. So let's tread carefully. Created by Hazel Held with an accredited co-creation from Lovecraft himself, Rhan-Tegoth's first appearance came in the astounding short story The Horror in the Museum, which is exactly as it sounds, and yes, a Lovecraftian protagonist was stupid enough to find a Great Old One and stick it in a museum. And as we all know, that's terrible for business. Also known as the terror of the hominids, yes, as in us, and he of the ivory throne, Rhan-Tegoth is described as a 15-foot Medusa-esque insectoid amphibious god that is particularly acclimatized in the deep dark ocean. For millennia it lived in the vaporous boiling seas of Yog-Sothoth before its machinations were devised, and it was hurtled toward Earth roughly 3 million years ago during the Pliocene epoch, where it landed in a remote part of Alaska and commenced its slumber. As the Horror in the Museum describes, it was discovered by a George Rogers in 1926, where it was briefly contained in London before being lost to a shadowy cult, briefly appearing again in the 1980s and the 1990s. The thing is with Rhan-Tegoth, although of little power compared to the rest of its brood, this guy spells the return of the old ones. When it crashed into Earth, it was the last of the cosmic horrors to fall asleep, and the High Priest himself intended Rhan-Tegoth to be the first one to awake, to herald the return of the Great Old Ones. Coming in next at number 4, the Shoggoths. Because although we've covered Great Old Ones, outer gods and shambling horrors alike, I feel that we're yet to fully take a look at some of the more monstrous races that inhabit the Cthulhu mythos, and perhaps the most vile and interesting of those creations are the Shoggoths, one of Lovecraft's most curious and divisive devices, who have played an incredibly interesting yet equally horrifying role in the mythos. The Shoggoths are a race of amorphous, shape-shifting beings originally created by the Elder Things through highly advanced genetic engineering to serve them for eternity as formless tools that would do their bidding. The Shoggoths are blobs of self-shaping gelatinous flesh, almost like an amoeba, and are capable of shaping themselves into whatever organ or shape they find needful. The Elder Things abused them for eons, creating their vast underwater cities and ancient kingdoms deep in the bowels of planet Earth. The thing is though, despite being thoughtless writhing masses of tentacles and maws, eventually after millennia they mutated and developed sentience, where they rebelled against their masters and consumed them, and from there they created their own giant cities, which is where we first got a taste of the horrifying Shoggoths in Lovecraftian fiction in 1931's At the Mountains of Madness, where the last remnants of this vile race of fleshy beings were found buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice by the one and only William Dyer. And as it turns out, the last Shoggoth had sustained itself by feasting on penguins, which makes it that much more evil. Next up at number 3, Ithaqua. Otherwise known as the Windwalker or the god of the cold white silence, Ithaqua is the Lovecraftian equivalent of both the Wendigo and the Yeti, yet like with many of these terrifying Great Old Ones, he's 1,000 feet tall and inspires horror on a cosmic scale. Ithaqua is an enormous humanoid with webbed feet and glowing red eyes who frequently stalks the Arctic wilderness, preying on the unwary and the unfortunate. Many of those who live in Ithaqua's hunting grounds leave sacrifices in a stark effort to appease the beast, but as you can guess, it's never very successful. Anyone who is unfortunate enough to be caught by Ithaqua are dragged off to his true home, the ice-ridden planet of Borea, where he aims to swell his growing band of worshippers. It gets weirder though, because Ithaqua will then attempt to mate with any females by inserting a psychic seed into their womb, inevitably developing into a Great Old One offspring. He aims that one day one of these terrifying children will help in destroying their true enemy, the Elder Gods, though historically this hasn't gone too well, and Ithaqua still waits for his true terrifying heir. Well, we said it before, but the Great Old Ones are some pushy parents. Swinging in at number 2, Yig. And if you've got a fear of snakes, you may want to look away for this one. Yig, also known as the father of serpents, or even more conveniently, the snake god, has a pretty straightforward role in the pantheon of the Great Old Ones, although it's in his method where the real fear lies. Yig manifests as a gigantic snake with the arms of a man, although he sometimes appears as a bizarre reptilian humanoid. Lizard people. am I right? Yig is considered to be the god of snakes and serpents everywhere, and his fierce devotion to his children is the source of his wrath. When he emerges from his sleep, his sole purpose is to punish those who have harmed his serpentine brood. In The Curse of Yig, written in 1929 by Zelia Bishop and edited by H.P. Lovecraft himself, a couple from Arkansas moved to Oklahoma in search of a better life in the late 1800s. Unfortunately for them though, the husband has a fear of snakes, and his wife deliberately destroys a nest of newborn rattlesnakes to ease his phobia. Well, yeah. Bad news, and Yig sends swarms of his children to attack the couple, killing their dog in the process. In the end, to ultimately take his vengeance, Yig forces the woman to kill her own husband with an axe before transforming her into a part human, part reptile monstrosity, cursing her to wriggle on her belly like a snake for all eternity. Yikes. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Azathoth. The big guy himself, and the fact that it's taken us 3 videos to finally reach this guy is saying something. Now, you see, it's difficult because Azathoth isn't a great old one or elder god. He's an outer god, and that means that he doesn't concern himself with the likes of Cthulhu and his brood. He's an intangible horror, an entity that lurks in the darkest depths of space, writhing in an eternity of cosmic torment. Also known as the nuclear chaos, the demon sultan, and the blind idiot god, Azathoth's first appearance was in an unfinished 500-word short story written by Lovecraft in 1922, which would later be transformed into the dream quest of unknown Kadath. Azathoth exists outside reality, and there can be no definite description, as everyone envisions his ever-changing visage differently. He gave birth to the darkness, the nameless mist Nyarlathotep, and spat forth Yog-Sothoth. In the Insects from Shagai by Ramsey Campbell, his worshippers are many, and in a forest temple in the Goatswood, his cultists worship an idol carved in his image, a horrible, bestial, mouthless face with deep-sunk eyes and covered in glistening black hair. As far as Lovecraftian entities are concerned, they don't get much more cosmically terrifying than Azathoth, a creature so vile that even uttering his name can drive people to madness. I guess I best shut up then. Kicking off at number 5, The Dunwich Horror. Written in 1928 and first published in April's issue of Weird Tales, the awesome American horror fiction pulp magazine that featured the likes of Clark Ashton Smith, Robert E. Howard, and of course, Lovecraft himself. The Dunwich Horror is a vivid display of atmospheric horror and a slow burn that weaves its way around the Cthulhu mythos while always keeping its cards close enough to its chest. The Dunwich Horror focuses on the character of Wilbur Whateley, the horrific humanoid spawn of the alleged witch Lavinia Whateley, and no other than the outer god Yog-Sothoth himself. Since birth, Wilbur matured at a disgustingly rapid rate, reaching manhood within a decade. He is described as goat-like, half outer god and half human, and a being that stank of death and decay. Well, as we soon realise, Wilbur isn't the only child of Lavinia and Yog-Sothoth. He has a twin brother, the Dunwich Horror, a secret kept deep within the bowels of their familial home. The Dunwich Horror cemented the locations of Miskatonic University, Arkham, and Dunwich itself into the canon of the Cthulhu mythos, important places that make up Lovecraft's bizarre universe. Coming in at number 4, The Rats in the Walls. And I absolutely love this story, so much so I've got no idea why it hasn't yet been adapted into a hit horror flick, because it's awesome. Although Wes Craven's The People Under the Stairs kind of alludes to it, it's not the same. The premise itself is nightmarish enough that you'd probably get the spooks just by reading the blurb. It focuses on the last descendant of the Delacour family, an American who, following the death of his only son during World War I, returns to England to his family's ancestral estate, Exham Priory, a cursed place that the locals are fearful of. Always a sign. While our fearful narrator soon discovers the real reason why his family's ancient estate was abandoned. He learns that his family maintained a cavernous underground city for centuries where they raised entire generations of human cattle to supply their taste for flesh. Eventually it was stopped when Delacour's great-great-grandfather killed his entire family in their sleep and left the country in order to end the horror. What a good guy. And yeah, the story doesn't really end there either, it gets worse. So much worse. The Rats in the Walls is an absolutely incredible demonstration of horror in literature, and if you haven't, you should read it. Next up at number 3, Tsathoggua. And this guy comes from a long line of great old ones that are incredibly difficult to pronounce, which even for Lovecraftian fiction is probably on the more master tier side of deciphering the Eldritch tongue, but whatever. I'll give it a go. Tsathoggua, whose grandfather is Kshaskluth, whose father is Gisguth, whose mother is Jesus Christ. What is that? Whose mother is still Zemgi and whose child is known as Vilpoggua. Okay, nailed it. Maybe, I think so. But anyway, the point is this particular Great Old One was created by Clark Ashton Smith, one of Lovecraft's contemporaries, who, whilst having a penchant for language, also had a desire to create some of the vilest, weirdest cosmic horrors in the genre. Tsathoggua, also known as the Sleeper of Nakai, is a Great Old One, often appearing in the form of a monstrous, vile, toad-like creature who is often found asleep in the deep bowels of his kingdom, waiting for eternity for sacrificial offerings. He's definitely the couch dweller of the brood, but the slothfulness of Tsathoggua is exactly what makes him so horrifying. Deep beneath the earth, Tsathoggua waits within his black temple, where his will is carried out by a writhing, formless spawn of polymorphic entities made of black goo that sit inside his throne in basins carved from ancient stone. Although the Great Old One himself rarely moves, the formless spawn are alive and writhing within his kingdom, ready to consume any curious adventurer or lost soul that stumbles upon him, where they'll attach themselves with their undulating appendages, rip their flesh to shreds and feed it to their master bit by bit. Perhaps more than any other Great Old One in the mythos, Tsathoggua isn't willing to lift a finger to bring about an apocalyptic cosmic horror. He'd just rather get fat and sit on his obsidian throne and wait for it to come to him. Lazy. Swinging in at number 2, Baghthish, and I absolutely adore the lore behind this particular deity, simply for the fact that it approaches human history in an incredibly interesting and equally terrifying way. When you think of Lovecraftian fiction, you don't exactly think of the Roman Empire, do you? Well, let me introduce you to the serpent-bearded Baghthish, the Berkeley toad, a writhing, multicolored entity with a single eye, the claws of a crab, and an endless beard of tentacles. His appearance is caught somewhere between a spider, somewhere between a crab, and somewhere between the horror that lies at the end of all dreams. Created by Robert Bloch, Baghthish first appeared in the September 1935 issue of Weird Tales, but would later go on to play an integral role in Ramsey Campbell's 1964 short story, The Room in the Castle. Although not exactly on the most powerful scale compared to the rest of the Great Old Ones, in ancient times Baghthish was summoned to Earth by the Deep Ones to join the rest of his brood, but yet during some unknown event Baghthish was cut off from the rest of his ilk by the warring elder gods and sealed behind a stone door in what would later become the Severn Valley. Eons later, when the Romans conquered Britain, a small band of soldiers heard the whisperings of the Great Old One and became corrupted by his will. Driven mad with cosmic torment, the Roman soldiers formed a cult around the god, which were eventually consumed by his eldritch will in a failed attempt to escape the stone seal. Centuries later, a Norman castle was built over the site that contained Baghthish prison, and it wasn't until the 18th century when Baghthish was discovered by a warlock named Sir Gilbert Morley and eventually used as a puppet for his dark arts. For hundreds of years, Baghthish would feast upon the townsfolk offered to him by Morley to keep his primal needs satiated, but eventually Baghthish became so large that he trapped himself within his cavernous prison for eternity. Well, until he sheds a few pounds at least, and then I'm guessing he'll be really mad. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, Ubbo-Sathla. And our final spot is reserved for an incredibly interesting and different kind of Lovecraftian concept, because although this specific anomalous entity is very much an outer god of the Cthulhu mythos, one of the most powerful ancient beings in existence, it's also a creation that is far removed from anything else. Let me introduce you to Ubbo-Sathla, which is perhaps the eldritch progenitor of all life as we know it. Yeah, get ready for an existential kind of crisis. Ubbo-Sathla, also known as the unbegotten source or the demiurge, is a huge protoplasmic mass resting within a forgotten grotto deep beneath the frozen earth. The being itself is a life form like few others within the mythos and is comprised of a mass of writhing substances spontaneously generating primordial single-celled organisms that pour unceasingly from its shapeless form. It is thought that Ubbo-Sathla was the original spawn of all forms of life on Earth, spitting forth prototype after prototype before it reached its cosmic epoch, and just as the giver of life, it can also just as easily take it away, as whatever its endless mass of pseudopods touch becomes forever devoid of life. Created by Clark Ashton Smith again and first appearing in its short story of the same name, the ultimate purpose of Ubbo-Sathla is relatively unclear, yet deep within its ancient hive it is said to guard a set of stone tablets believed to contain a hidden knowledge of the elder gods. However, some cultists also profess that Ubbo-Sathla's destiny is to someday reabsorb all living things on Earth back from whence whence they came, consuming it back into its endless, formless shape of Ubbo-Sathla. It is also said that in ancient times the demiurge split off a portion of itself and became the vile protean mass known as Azathoth, the source of uncleanliness that now resides deep beneath the horrifying landscape of Mount Vormithadreth, spitting forth endless horrors of miscreation and abomination. Yeah, if you can't tell, Ubbo-Sathla is pretty damn terrifying, and this eldritch horror has its fingers in many pies. I mean, if it had fingers. Kicking off at number 5, The Mist. What a great scene. And as my guy Roguefish66 so astutely pointed out in the comment section of our previous video, Stephen King, through his work, wrote love letters to Lovecraft, and by proxy, his work is directly inspired by the OGs of cosmic horror. Tentacles wrapped up in some foggy mist? Yeah, it's Lovecraft. 2007's The Mist, written and directed by Frank Darabont and based upon the fantastic 1980 horror novella by Stephen King, is a stark visual representation of Lovecraftian themes at a human level. Also, it stars Thomas Jane, and as we all know, Thomas Jane is awesome. First released in November 2007, The Mist focuses on the members of a small town of Bridgeton, Maine, who after a severe thunderstorm flee to the town's only supermarket to stock up on supplies. Initially, unbeknownst to them, a strange, terrifying cosmic mist descends on the town, concealing vicious and hungry Lovecraftian monsters. What plays out is a visceral demonstration of exactly what happens when hits the eldritch fan and humanity succumbs to the threat of insignificant annihilation. Darabont is also one of the few filmmakers able to nail King's work and somehow managed to pen an ending that even terrified the Grandmaster of Horror himself. That's quite the accolade. Coming in next at number 4, The Whisperer in Darkness.
I've collected books full of evidence in support of the idea that there are worlds beyond our own, and people, creatures that have come here from somewhere else.
Talking about love letters to Lovecraft, this is exactly that, and in my opinion, perhaps one of the most faithful, endearing, direct depictions of H.P. Lovecraft's fiction, which is to be expected as it's one of the few films to be independently produced and distributed by the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society. It was also financially backed by Sandy Peterson, the author of the awesome tabletop RPG Call of Cthulhu, so it kind of comes with the territory, really. The film itself was shot on mythoscope with the intention of authentically capturing that distinct black and white 1930s B-movie vibe, and it does exactly that. The Whisperer in Darkness for the most part focuses on Lovecraft's short story of the same name, and we get to see one of Lovecraft's most excruciatingly likeable characters, Albert Wilmarth, unravel the plot of the Migo and their desire to stick all of our brains in jars. There's not much more to this movie other than it being a cut-for-cut, shot-for-shot, faithful adaptation of Lovecraft's work, albeit with a better ending that probably ties things together in a much better way for the silver screen. Who knew? Swinging in at number 3, The Shadow over Innsmouth, which is a Lovecraftian story that really gives rise to the whole fish people kind of vibe. If you're a fan of the deep ones or unwittingly corrupted by them, in which case I'm terribly sorry for you, then you'll find some comfort in this tale. The Shadow over Innsmouth lays the foundation for some of Lovecraft's more well-known themes, the idea of an ancient aquatic race, the deep ones, the esoteric order of Dagon, and of course Cthulhu, but more importantly it permeated the idea of a remote, isolated society that practices bizarre occultist rituals. It's an idea that gave way to the likes of The Wicker Man and The City of the Dead, and Lovecraft's stories managed to thrive in bleak isolation. I'm not gonna lie, this story has a pretty existential ending, more in the sense that humanity has no real sway over the more powerful beings at play. As Lovecraft emphasized in the opening sentence of The Call of Cthulhu, the most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. Next up at number 2, The Dreams in the Witch House, which perhaps isn't the most obvious choice, but oh my Cthulhu, this one is great, and testament to Lovecraft's unrivaled ability to tell a terrifying straight up horror story. There's some real star players in this one too, even alluding to Azathoth himself and his dark throne at the center of chaos. If you're looking for a resolute Lovecraft story with a distinct beginning, middle and end, then look no further, and I'd suggest The Dreams in the Witch House to anyone wanting to start out in the Cthulhu mythos. It focuses on the character of Walter Gilman, a genuinely likeable narrator and a curious student of mathematics and folklore at the Miskatonic University in the titular county of Arkham, Massachusetts. He rents a room at the allegedly haunted Witch House, a place which once harbored Keziah Mason, an accused witch who disappeared mysteriously from Salem in 1692. Witch House manages to weave genuinely creepy folklore tropes with what he does best, cosmic horror, and he does it in such a natural way that it quickly and very viscerally takes you off guard. Great stuff. And finally, our number one spot at the Mountains of Madness, which in all reality is the real benchmark for any science fiction horror ever. At the Mountains of Madness is a freaking incredible display of everything that Lovecraft represents. Ancient mystery, cosmic forces at play, blended with science and rational thought, all from the human perspective and the stark reality that nothing you do really matters when you're staring down a cosmic behemoth. I really don't want to spoil anything for this story because the final reveal is the heart of the horror, and as with all things H.P. Lovecraft, there's never any happy endings. If it's any consolation, Guillermo del Toro has been trying to make this into a feature film since 2006, but it's been delayed time and time again due to del Toro's insistence on it remaining true to Lovecraft's form, which, may I add, is a fantastic thing, because originally James Cameron was going to make it in 3D with Tom Cruise attached as a star, which is all kinds of horrifying and not in the good way. In 2013, Del Toro stated that he's going to have one more shot at making it, and recently there have been stirrings of him being greenlit for a passion project, so seriously guys, fingers crossed. Kicking off at number 5, Banshee Chapter 2013. And as far as modern horror goes, this one actually stood out in an era of pretty mediocre horror movies. Not only that, but it also managed to pull off found footage horror in a highly original way, while also sticking true to Lovecraft's themes. Banshee Chapter, released in 2013 and directed by Blair Erickson, is loosely based on the H.P. Lovecraft short story From Beyond, and also the 1986 movie adaptation, which may or may not be on this list. Banshee Chapter pretty much has everything you want when it comes to sci-fi horror. Mind-altering narcotics, shadowy alien entities, mysterious number stations broadcasting from the desert. It's jam-packed with cosmic horror goodness, and it also manages to convincingly portray Lovecraft's original short story, which explores the fear of interdimensional reality and the terrifying thought of what amorphous anomalies lurk in a different plane of existence. If MK Ultra and shadowy government organizations pique your interest, then Banshee Chapter will be the exact dose of mind-altering substance that you need. Give it a watch, Lovecraft would be proud. Coming in at number 4, From Beyond, 1986.
Humans are such easy prey. Let her go! Oh, I will.
See, I told you it may or may not be on this list, which it is, and I kind of had to put these guys back to back because essentially they're the same film in terms of plot, but From Beyond is absolutely terrifyingly awesome, especially if you're a fan of quintessential 80s splatter horror, because some of the visual effects in this film are absolutely insane. It comes from director Stuart Gordon, a Lovecraft fan like no other, who directed an earlier B-movie masterpiece called Castle Freak, and would later go on to direct 2001's Dagon, as well as a TV interpretation of Dreams in the Witch House. This guy understood H.P. Lovecraft in a time when horror cinema was trying its utmost to shock and gross us out. A good pairing. From Beyond tells the story of a bunch of scientists who are trying to replicate the human pineal gland, the part of the brain responsible for sleep and our perception of reality. Well, of course, this is a Lovecraft story, and like with Banshee Chapter, this film explores the idea of cosmic horror lurking within the realms of trans-dimensional reality. To be honest, I wouldn't recommend this movie primarily for its pastiche to Lovecraft's skill in crafting a story, because there's not much to it really, but if you're a fan of grotesque, classic 80s gore, this one's for you. It's awesome. Next up at number 3, The Plateau of Leng. And now we're getting into perhaps the more genuinely terrifying landscapes of Lovecraftian fiction, where space and time cease to function in all manners that we understand. Now, if we're being honest, there are countless places alluded to in the Cthulhu mythos, perhaps a sentence here and there in reference to its horrifying mysteries, but none of them are as fleshed out as the Plateau of Leng is, which is an impressive feat given the fact that it's actually never been fully described. Yeah, I know, but that's just cosmic horror for you, I guess. As it first appeared in 1922's The Hound, Leng is a cold cold and arid plateau, whose location seemingly varies entirely depending on who is observing it. In the Hound, the Necronomicon details that its location actually resides in Central Asia, and it is inhabited by a human corpse-eating cult. Seemingly, the notorious scholar Abdul al-Zared describes it as a place where different realities converge, which could perhaps explain why its precise location can never be pinned down. Again, in 1926, the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, the Plateau of Leng is said to be located in the north of the Dreamlands, and strangely enough, it is residence of the High Priest not to be described, a mysterious figure who dwells alone in a strange prehistoric monastery to the Great Old Ones, accompanied by a race of vile, goatish humanoids. Yeah, and if it doesn't sound like a nice place, that's because it really isn't. In fact, it is also believed that in the legendary novella At the Mountains of Madness, the expedition featured in that particular tale who discovers an ancient abandoned city of impossible dimension created by the Elder Things is in fact a manifestation of the Plateau of Leng, a crossover of the ancient places of the Cthulhu mythos emerging from the fabric of twisted time and space. Yeah, essentially, if you end up on the Plateau of Leng, you're probably in for a bit of a terrifying ruckus, I guess. Coming in at number 2, R'lyeh. Come on guys, you only knew it was a matter of time, because in his house at R'lyeh, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. And if we're talking about abandoned cities of impossible dimension and terrifying architecture, then we need only take a quick glance at the sunken city to realise just exactly what Lovecraft's intention was. Because it's crazy that we can even elaborate on this, but the reality is old Howard Phillips made architecture scary. He really did, and we can only admire what an impressive feat that really is. First appearing in Lovecraft's 1928 short story The Call of Cthulhu, R'lyeh is a sunken city located deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, a treacherous place characterized by its bizarre architecture of non-Euclidean geometry, and of course the place where the Great Old One, the High Priest himself, Cthulhu, waits dreaming. As Lovecraft first describes, the nightmare corpse city of R'lyeh was built in measureless eons behind history by the vast, loathsome shapes that seep down from the dark stars. There lay great Cthulhu and his hordes, hidden in green slimy vaults until the end. Again, the man knew just exactly how to turn pillars of stone into looming behemoths of a place that our frail human minds could never fully comprehend. Now, if you haven't read The Call of Cthulhu, then please dive into it because it's a fantastic read, but as is described in that story, Lovecraft details R'lyeh as a city of panorama, vast angles of stone surfaces, too great to belong to anything right and proper for this earth. He calls it abnormal, impious, and filled to the brim of horrible images. Although no one has ever been there, Lovecraft makes a point that navigating the city on foot is nearly impossible. Surfaces that appear flat may be tilted, angles of masonry that appear convex at first glance will shift and change to appear concave. Nothing is as it seems, and R'lyeh is a place that was never intended to be witnessed by human beings. Yeah, take note, if you're trying to write a terrifying location, this is a whole different level. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Carcosa. Of course, because although a place not primarily created by Lovecraft himself, when it comes to cosmic horror, there are fewer places in the terrifying cosmos that strike such unimaginable fear in the hearts of us weary humans as that of Carcosa. And again, much like with the Plateau of Leng, this place has never been truly comprehended in the many texts of the Cthulhu mythos. And let's not beat about the bush, that's the reason why it's truly terrifying, right? Because if there was some kind of revelation that Carcosa was in fact the home of a race of cute, fluffy, bear-like Ewoks, we wouldn't be scared in the slightest. You see, that could be true, that could be the case, but the fact that we don't know and the fact that we will never know is why our curiosity is piqued, and it is why we are fearful of it. It is the literal definition of cosmic horror, the fear of the unknown. First mentioned in the 1886 short story by Ambrose Bierce, an inhabitant of Carcosa, the ancient and mysterious city is barely described and is only ever viewed in hindsight following its alleged destruction by the narrator who once lived there. The city would later be picked up and used more extensively in the Robert W. Chambers book The King in Yellow, although the mysterious allusion to its location or even its origin was still its primary function. Chambers gave us just enough information about Carcosa to keep our intrigue peaked, and in fact that has been the same fuel that has kept the mystery of Carcosa in our cultural memory for so long. No other place in literature has been passed from pillar to post, from author to author, so often as Carcosa. In The King in Yellow, the city of Carcosa is a mysterious, ancient and impossibly cursed place. One description of its location is said to be located on the shores of the Lake of Harley, deep within the Hyades star cluster. Where's that? beats me, but I'm pretty confident that we should all avoid it. As the Cthulhu mythos has later elaborated upon, it is believed that Carcosa is the residence of the Great Old One, Hastur, who often merges the reality of Earth with his home dimension of Carcosa, seemingly plucking humans out of thin air like apples on a tree to be his tortured playthings. Yeah. Carcosa. It literally goes without saying, but it's a pretty terrifying place. Kicking off at number 5, Zthilamog. An entity that really lives up to its namesake of being weird, amorphous, and full of tentacles. Zthilamog, also known as the Dweller in the Depths, is a great old one whose first appearance was in 1975's Out of the Ages by Lynn Carter, who then later emerged in Brian Lumley's Titus Crow series. Zthilamog is described as being distortedly cone-shaped and having 4 sucker-lined arms similar to that of a starfish, apexed with a tooth-filled maw and a great mane of tentacles. Zthilamog was spawned as the 3rd son of Cthulhu and Idya, untold eons ago in the binary star system of Zoth. His brood brothers and sisters are Gathanothoa, Ithaqua, and Cthulhu, and along with their father Cthulhu, they all shipped off to Earth. Eventually, Zthilamog was defeated in the long war with the Elder Gods, and he was imprisoned deep beneath the seabed near his father's tomb in the dead city of R'lyeh. He waits there for eternity, whispering into the darkness, waiting to cast his will into the dreams of mankind. Much like his dad. Coming in at number 4, Ihort. First appearing in the 1980 Ramsey Campbell novel Before the Storm, although appearing in reference notes since the late 60s, Ihort is quite the mysterious Great Old One. And that's saying something because, as you know, these guys are pretty elusive. Here's something to sum this guy up. His name is derived from the German word Ei, meaning egg, and Horten, which means horde. Yeah, he's a walking, clicking sack of Great Old One babies. Gross. Ihort, also known as the God of the Labyrinth, lives in an endless network of caverns and tunnels situated beneath the Severn Valley in England, which is near where I grew up. No thank you. Ihort appears as an enormous gelatinous blob supported on hundreds of tiny bone-like legs. Its whole body is covered in a shifting, writhing mass of eyes which constantly disperse and reform at random. The real kicker though is the reason for Ihort's existence. It lives for the sole purpose of capturing humans who stray into its realm. Once it captures a poor, hopeless, unfortunate victim, it offers them a bargain. Either they allow Ihort to implant its young into their still living body and eventually after incubation burst into a disgusting brood of its vile babies, or be immediately and violently, gruesomely consumed. Yeah, I think I'll take the latter.
Coming in at number 3, we've got Tsathoggua. I mentioned this old one in the entry concerning Yig. See, these two don't really get along. Tsathoggua usurped Yig and took over the deep cavernous Yoth. At one point he chilled on Saturn, but soon decided that Earth was a better call if he wanted sacrifices. And he loves sacrifices. Too bad he's too lazy to go out and get them himself. Known as the Sleeper of N'Kai, this despicable slovenly creature rarely stirs at all. Squat and pot-bellied with the head of a toad and fur that reminds one of a sloth-bat combo, Tsathoggua is among the laziest of all cosmic creatures. He refuses to leave his chamber unless mortally threatened, and even then it's a whole ordeal. If anyone disturbs his rest, he will eat them. That is, unless they have a sacrifice to offer. If this is the case, he'll let the disturber go and dine on the poor, unfortunate soul instead. After eating, he does what any good layabout does and heads right back to sleep. Now most people would hear all this and say, great, he'll never get me because I'll never bother him. Easy peasy. Well, the thing is, Tsathoggua rules over a bunch of creatures that can and will go out of their way to grab and kill you. His formless spawn appear to be polymorphic black goo creatures. They are very resilient and hard to kill and will take the shape of whatever's necessary to end your life. These blobby beasts can even squeeze into the tightest gaps to continue pursuit, so shutting the door in their face will not stop them. Add that to the legacy cursed serpent men inherited from Yig and you'll see why Tsathoggua is a beast you'd rather keep deep underground. Swimming in at number 2, we've got Dagon. Speaking of deep, let's talk about an aquatic great old one. Dagon, he who presides over the deep ones, consort to Mother Hydra, worshipped by the esoteric order of Dagon, converter of Innsmouth. An absolute legend. Dagon is the shadow over Innsmouth, among other things. Seemingly immortal, he has grown and grown over the years and is now absolutely gigantic. Deep ones are humanoid, ocean-dwelling creatures able to live for ages and grow even when fully mature. Some are said to be over 50 feet in height and depicted in arcane artwork as wrestling whales. Badass. Dagon is even larger, stronger, and more powerful than any of the other Deep Ones. In fact, his apparent immortality and longevity might be thanks to the Star Spawn. These tiny Cthulhu-style beings have been known to choose exceptional beings as the leaders of that particular race, and empower them with abilities to make them stand apart from the rest. Whether this is true of Dagon himself, we may never know, but seeing what the Deep Ones can do to the human population of Innsmouth and their general insane physical abilities, we probably don't want to know everything about him. He's better off in the depths, dealing with whatever business Dagon has to deal with. And finally, at number 1, we've got Cthulhu. But of course, how could we leave Cthulhu off a list of Lovecraftian monsters we don't want escaping? He's the one that pretty much started it all. These spawning grounds for all sorts of creatures and tales making up the Cthulhu mythos. Sure, it seems cliche at this point, but cliches become common for a reason. This great old one lies in a death-like slumber at the bottom of the Pacific. The once great city of Relaya lies in the depths, cradling Cthulhu until he can make his triumphant return. And people are really trying to speed up this process. Appearing as part octopus, dragon, and humanoid with a pulpy, tentacled head and grotesque, scaly body, Cthulhu uses his telepathic abilities to mold human dreams. Through these slumber-altering powers, he's established the cult of Cthulhu, full of people willing to do anything to please their god. Once his city sunk, though, his powers became muted. The ocean waters proved to be a great barrier between him and his followers. Still, to this day, his worshippers gather around the world to chant, calling for his return. The English translation of the most popular chant is, "In his house at Relaya, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. Someday he'll awaken, and his worshippers want to be ready." Even the Deep Ones mentioned before worship him. Cthulhu has been featured in many a tale, with some of the most famous being At the Mountains of Madness, and of course, the Call of Cthulhu. His presence in these tales is maddening indeed, causing those who behold him to lose their minds and all control. If he were to wake and leave the ancient underwater city, humanity would be subjugated in a matter of days. His influence would spread like wildfire, recruiting any and all sapient beings to his ranks, physically and mentally twisting them until unrecognizable. And once this world was conquered, on to the next.
Kicking off at number 5, Lucathu. And what better way to start off this list than with the mother of all old gods herself, Lucathu, also known as Lucathu, or as a much more horrifying title, the birth womb of the great old ones. This twisted, pulsating mass of a mother was created by James Ambule, with its one and only appearance in the 1998 short story, Correlated Contents, which makes the very little that we do know about it even more terrifying. It poses the question, what does this hulking cosmic entity have in store for us? Well, Lucathu appears as a colossal conglomeration of innards spanning the size of a large planetary body. Imagine the planet Mars, but instead of a rocky desert-like surface, it's made up of skin and flesh and whatever else lies beneath. Lucathu possesses a strange slimy outer surface covered in countless thousands of pulsating pustules, which in fact are biological incubators, each containing a great old one in its larval stage. Basically, each one of its warts contains a small, sprightly little baby Cthulhu, or worse, and it's currently unknown how often these entities reach maturity. Hopefully for us, it's not a regular occurrence. Gross, right? Next up at number 4, Groth, which kind of sounds like the sound you make when you do a sick burp, right? Groth, also known as the Harbinger, is an all-powerful outer god that floats without purpose across the endless cosmic abyss like some malevolent, omniscient nuclear karaoke ball. Groth is the size of a moon and coloured in a rusty shade of orange, all encompassed by an enormous, terrifying red eye, which often closes to avoid the detection of any nearby hostile entities. It has appeared twice in the Cthulhu mythos, first in the 1976 short story The Tugging by Ramsey Campbell, and later in 2004 in the Call of Cthulhu RPG game splat book The Stars Are Right. Groth spends eternity simply drifting throughout the cosmos, while terrifyingly singing its strange song, the music of the spheres. It serves a simple function. Whenever Groth nears a planet, any dormant great old one or outer god on the world will respond to its song and awaken, almost always resulting in the destruction of the planet, the annihilation of all life, or both. In one Lovecraftian instance, Groth was indirectly responsible for awakening the great old one known as the worm that gnaws in the night, who proceeded to consume the alien planet of Shagai from the inside out. Pretty metal. eh?
In at 3, Nyarlathotep. Now this character not only appears in the works of Lovecraft but also many other writers, but is most commonly known in association with its role as a deity in the Lovecraft mythos fictional universe, where it is known as the Crawling Chaos. It first appeared in Lovecraft's 1920 prose poem of the same name, and is described as one of the outer gods. Now Nyarlathotep differs from other beings in a number of ways, with most of them being exiled to stars like Yog-Sothoth and Hastur, or sleeping and dreaming like Cthulhu. However, the Crawling Chaos is active and walks the earth in the guise of a human being, typically tall, slim, and joyous. So unlike us. He is known to have had 1,000 other forms, most of them reputed to be maddeningly horrific. Now the other outer gods and great old ones are often described as mindless or unfathomable, rather than truly malevolent. However, this is not the case for this dude. He seems to truly delight in cruelty, is deceptive and manipulative, and even cultivates followers and uses propaganda to achieve his goals. Sounds like many politicians I know. In at 2, Yog-Sothoth. Yog is a cosmic entity and outer god born of the nameless mist. He is the progenitor of Cthulhu, Hastur the Unspeakable, and the ancestor of the Vor-Mi. Like many of our previous numbers, Yog has many different appearances throughout the various stories, by various authors. However, there seems to be a common agreement that Yog visually manifests as a mass of glowing orbs, with eyes or tendrils depending on which story you are reading. Now, though it is not outright stated, it is heavily implied that Yog is omniscient and is locked outside the universe, giving him the ability to see all of space-time at once, meaning there is no secret hidden from him. Bad news bears. Now, this dude first appeared in Lovecraft's The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, and goes on to be the driving force of the Dunwich Horror, in which he fathers twin children with a human. Dude gets around. What makes him truly menacing is that when called upon, he will assist mortals in performing occult deeds or rituals, with the most notable occurring in the previous mentioned stories. In the Dunwich Horror, he was summoned for the purpose of impregnating a human female, who then gave birth to 2 partially human children. The summoner was in fact the husband of the woman, who was known to stand on a hill in a circle of stones with the Necronomicon while shouting the name of Yog from the summit. Folks be crazy. Finally coming in at number 1, Azathoth. Sometimes called the blind idiot god, the nuclear chaos, the demon sultan, the deep dark, and the cold one, this dude is yet again another outer god that we have on our list. Now, there can be no definite description of Azathoth, as everyone envisions him differently, and he is ever changing. He is a significant presence in the Necronomicon, as both Albert Wilmarth and Walter Gilman are horrified at the mere mention of his name. Now, it is in the dreams in the witch house where he is referenced by the witch, who tells Walter Gilman that, I quote, he must meet the Black Man and go with them all to the throne of Azathoth, at the center of the ultimate chaos. He must sign in his own blood the Book of Azathoth and take a new secret name. What kept him from going with her to the throne of chaos, where the thin flutes pipe mindlessly, was the fact that he had seen the name Azathoth in the Necronomicon and knew it stood for primal horror too horrible for description. He's the ruler of the outer gods, guys. You don't with Azathoth. In at 5, Cthulhu. Now, you may be surprised to see Cthulhu at number 5, but as we proceed you'll see why. This fictional cosmic entity was first introduced in the short story The Call of Cthulhu, first published in Weird Tales in 1928. He is considered to be a great old one within the pantheon of Lovecraftian cosmic entities, and is depicted as a gigantic entity worshipped by cultists. His appearance is described as looking like an octopus, a dragon, and a caricature of a human form. It is an epic power that lies in a death-like slumber beneath the Pacific Ocean in a sunken city. As it stands, he remains a dominant presence in the eldritch dealings on our world. Now, it is unknown how large the throng of those who worship Cthulhu is, but his cult has many cells around the globe, and are known to chant the disturbing phrase. In his house at R'lyeh Dead, Cthulhu waits dreaming. Chills. Not only that, but Cthulhu has the ability to make people lose their minds by visual contact with the entity. Coming at 4, Yig. Yig is a deity in the Cthulhu mythos, and one of the great old ones who first appeared in the story The Curse of Yig, which was originally created by Zelia Bishop before being completely rewritten by Lovecraft. Now, in Lovecraft's story, he is described as, I quote, shapen like a man, except ye look at him close. According to Lovecraft, Yig's main characteristics is his devotion to snakes, his children, and he punishes those that harm them by turning them into spotted snakes. He is the father of Eeg and the mate of the outer god Yidra. Now, although Yig is easy to anger, Yig is also very easy to please as long as no harm comes to his children. Yes, he's a great dad. Number 1 dad.
Coming in at number 3, Dagon. Also known as Father Dagon, this guy is pretty damn huge when it comes to fishy amphibious cults. Dagon is an enormous deity that presides over the deep ones, the fish-like race indigenous to the Earth's oceans, and the ones responsible for the weird goings on in Innsmouth, the basis for most of Lovecraft's fictional work. First seen in his titular short story, Dagon, he's mentioned extensively throughout the Cthulhu mythos, in the ranks of the Great Old Ones, alongside his consort and mate, Mother Hydra. He is worshipped by the esoteric order of Dagon, a shadowy cult based in Innsmouth that go to great lengths to maintaining the existence of their ocean-dwelling god. Make no mistake about it, Father Dagon is absolutely huge, dwarfing the size of ancient whales. While apparently immortal, his eternal lifespan may actually be attributed to his relationship with the Starspawn, a cosmic race of Cthulhu-like beings who sometimes select formidable specimens from a given species to protect, nurture, and empower, for seemingly reasons known only to them. Swinging in at number 2, Gathanothoa, aka the Dark God, or if you're being more precise, literally the most grotesque and ugliest creature in the entire Cthulhu mythos, and that's saying something. Gathanothoa is the firstborn of Cthulhu, spawned by Idya on the planet Zoth, whose origin is first laid out in The Thing in the Pit by Lynn Carter. He is a huge amorphous monstrosity whose appearance is so hideous that anyone who gazes upon it is literally petrified into a living cadaver. The victim is permanently immobilized, the body taking on the consistency of leather, yet the real kicker, their brain is preserved indefinitely and remains fully aware. Wow. What a way to go. The Dark God was brought to Earth from the planet Yog-Sothoth, assisted by an ancient alien race, possibly the bug-like Mi-Go. On Earth they built a colossal fortress atop Mount Yadith-Go on the lost continent of Mu, and they sealed Gathanothoa inside the mountain, where it remains to this day, worshipped by a strange secret cult. No thank you. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Hastur. And really, it has to be. Sorry. The Cthulhu mythos has no place for puns, especially when we're addressing the name of Hastur the Unspeakable, perhaps the most bleak and utterly evil entity in the entirety of Lovecraftian fiction. Him who is not to be named, the King in Yellow and the Yellow Sign. Although he is most famously associated with Lovecraft, Hastur is only ever mentioned once in The Whisperer of Darkness. He was originally a creation of Ambrose Bierce and also appears in the 1895 horror collection The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers. Hastur is defined as a great old one, but there is potentially much more to him. He is the spawn of Yog-Sothoth and the half-brother of Cthulhu. He is also possibly the magnum in Ominandum, the overarching mystery of the Lovecraft mythos that culminates as the Nameless Mist. Hastur appears in several vile forms. The Feaster from afar, a black, shriveled, flying monstrosity dripping with tentacles tipped with razor-sharp talons that pierce a victim's skull and siphon out their brain. And also the King in Yellow, which was also referenced in the mesmerizing first season of True Detective. Time is a flat circle, check it out. Kicking off at number 5, Ygolac, a name that makes me realise the bizarre complexities of the Welsh language. Ygolac, also known as the Defiler, is one of the more nastier, shall we say, of the Great Old Ones. He's renowned as the god of perversion and depravity, and that's just not the human perception of taboo, but anything that can be conceived by a sane or otherwise sapient being. This guy is so ready to burst into the human plane and cause some disgusting chaos that merely speaking his name will usher him into our world, which I guess I better stop saying his name then. The Defiler's true form is uncertain, but when he possesses a human host, he appears as a grotesquely obese man, lacking a head and neck and a gaping mouth in the palm of each hand. He seeks those that read perverse and forbidden literature, offering the summoner the otherwise dubious honour of becoming his priest, or just simply eating them. Next up at number 4, Cthulhu. Also known as the Kraken or the Secret One, Cthulhu is one of the twisted offspring of Cthulhu and Idya. She has the appearance of a gigantic red-bodied, black-ringed and six-eyed octopus with small wings, so I guess she kinda takes after her father. Similarly, like Cthulhu, she can alter her body's proportions at will. Cthulhu's first major appearance was in his daughter's Darkling Womb, written by Tina Algens, where she was captured by marine researchers believing her to be a rare specimen of an undiscovered octopus species. Obviously, as you can imagine, it didn't go well. She also appears in The Hall of the Yellow King by Peter Rawlik in her humanoid form of a young girl as a possible bride for the unspeakable one, Hastur. The thing that makes Cthulhu so important though, and the reason why she's so heavily guarded by her cultists and followers, is that should Cthulhu somehow die, his secret daughter Cthulhu will give birth to him once again. How's that for a pushy parent? Coming in at number 3, Shub-Niggurath. You betcha, aka the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, an outer god who is the very definition of how messed up the Lovecraftian universe can get. Just like Lucathu, she is a perverse fertility deity responsible for belching forward some of the vilest creatures in the whole of the Cthulhu mythos. She appears as an evil cloud-like entity, an enormous mass which extrudes black tentacles, slime-dripping mouths, and more strangely than any other, writhing goat legs. She is the wife of the not-to-be-named one, don't ask, and the wife of Yog-Sothoth, who spawned forth the twins Nub and Yeb. Across the entire mythos, Shub-Niggurath is probably the most extensively worshipped by hundreds of twisted alien cultures and even druidic and barbaric cults on Earth. Her dark young are horrifying, pitch black monstrosities seemingly comprised of ropey tentacles who stand as tall as a tree on a pair of stumpy, you guessed it again, hoofed legs. Also, her milk, yes, you heard that correctly, her milk is often used in cult ceremonies, mutating those that drink it into fierce spawns of her brood. Nevertheless, she's seen as one of the most horrific creatures in horror fiction, being referenced several times by both Stephen King and Terry Pratchett, even making her way referentially into the Doctor Who universe. She's a pretty big deal, put it that way. Next up at number 2, Wilbur Whateley. This guy makes my number 2 spot simply because when I first read the Dunwich Horror, a short story by H.P. Lovecraft written way back when in 1928, for me, he was the most terrifying character throughout the whole damn thing, even more so than his twin brother, the titular Dunwich Horror, who, if we're being honest, was just the sad, misunderstood result of a mad woman and an outer god. Have some sympathy, guys. Wilbur Whateley was born in the rural town of Dunwich, Massachusetts, near the city of Arkham, where most Lovecraftian fiction takes place. The date of his birth was noted as the night before the hills rumbled and the dogs barked incessantly, which was telling because dogs continued to show an instinctual hatred for Wilbur the remainder of his life. Good job, doggos. We can always rely on you. Let's not glean over it. Wilbur Whateley was a pretty ugly dude. The reason being that, well, he was made up of outer godness. As a child, he was described as a dark, goatish looking infant and displayed an unnatural physical and mental development. He could walk unassisted at 7 months and talk at 11 months. At the age of 4, he began growing facial hair. If you've seen the 1970 B movie, then you'll know what we're getting at, because that final reveal where Wilbur disintegrates into the floor, yeah, that's not nice. And finally, at number 1, Nyarlathotep. Because let's be real, no other entity in the Cthulhu mythos is as innately evil as our good old friend Dr. Nyarlathotep. The big bad himself, the ancient evil that walks on 2 legs and has many names. The Black Wind, the Crawling Mist, the Haunter of the Dark, the God of the Bloody Tongue. You may not know it, but this guy is pretty much the culmination of every evil fictional overlord since his first appearance in Lovecraft's 1920 prose poem of the same name. He is a creature that carries many masks, but usually appears as a tall, handsome, joyous man with welcoming features. All of this is a ruse, however, as told in 1932's The Dreams in the Witch House. He has 1,000 other forms that will immediately invoke madness to whoever witnesses him. It's strange because out of most of the outer gods who are evil and all-powerful but never really demonstrate a clear purpose or agenda, Nyarlathotep seems to be deliberately deceptive and manipulative, operating a clear agenda to achieve his twisted goals and making him the most human-like amongst all the outer gods. His one true goal is to spread madness, which is more enjoyable than death and destruction, and it is often suggested in the Cthulhu mythos that eventually he will destroy the entirety of the human race while laughing like a madman. Well, let's hope not, eh?